Hello, everybody. It is Saturday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. This is Starfleet Tactical. I am Chris Weuve. I'm here every week. Not here every week is Andy Presby.
Not here every week.
Not here every week. So thank you very much, Andy, for joining us. Now, Andy is one of those people that I'd like to have on the show more than I'm able to have on the show because he is a what we would say in the military, a high demand, low density asset.
Mostly for my children, but yes.
So of which he has three. So Hull 3 is how old now?
Month and a half-ish.
So that's one of the reasons why we got Andy is that I called Andy and said, I called him up and said, when are you ever going to have more ability to adjust your schedule to be on the show? And he went, you're right. I'll be on the show on Saturday. So, well,
the other funny part is the kid's going to wake up in an hour anyway, and I'll be up in an hour anyway. So
that all works. So Andy's going to come on the show. This is one that I've had on the list for a while that I've wanted to talk about replicators, but I kind of wanted Andy to be around. Now, let me go ahead and throw the slides up because you'll notice it says part 1, you don't understand the economics. The way I've always talked about this is that it's a two-part thing. The first one is it doesn't work the way that or even if it worked the way that you thought it worked, you're wrong. Turns out that doesn't fit in the title thing of YouTube. And then the second part of it would be, and you're wrong about how it works also. Now, as it turns out, that isn't necessarily, I mean, every now and then I have an idea that doesn't quite work as well in practice as it seemed in my head at the time. I know that that's absolutely totally shocking to everybody. But this is one of those times in that when it came time to actually sort of sit down and think about slides, it actually became a lot harder to make it sort of split down that way because, and so the end result of that is, and I've got a slide on this and I'm going to talk about it. I'm sort of skipping ahead on myself, which I always do, obviously. But it basically boils down to, there's a lot of places where Andy and I are just going to say, press the I believe button on this. Just trust us that it works this way, because we have to refer to kind of how it works, but we don't want to get into the nitty gritty details of that.
That's next time.
That's not the presentation that we put together. So that one's coming. The next time I have Andy on the show, we'll do part 2. The next time after that we have him on the show, we will do part 1 of his power systems talk. Because Andy has probably done more thinking about Star Trek power systems than anybody else, with the possible exception of Rick Sternbach.
It's not like I like the show or anything.
Yeah. You can't quite see everything, but there's 3 Enterprises and a Deep Space Nine in that room, in addition to some.
No, there's 4 Enterprises and a Deep Space Nine, and if I could, I'd have the B and the C in here too.
Yeah, that room is, his office is not as big as my office. His office is about half the size of my office. Now, he has fewer bookcases, but so he's actually got more wall space than I do, probably. I'm actually thinking about, I've got this peaked ceiling, which you can't see, and I'm actually thinking about putting posters on the ceiling. The only reason I don't is because they would, first of all, how am I going to put posters on the ceiling? And second of all, they would be too far away for me to actually truly enjoy.
Sticky tack.
Yeah, but still too far away to actually truly enjoy, because I have cathedral ceilings in this room. But Andy, I said Andy's done a lot of thinking about power systems. Andy and neither Andy or I are speaking on behalf of any employer, past, present, or future.
Oh no.
That having been said, Andy's academic background is actually very closely related. It is as closely related to a warp core as you can get and still be in 21st century America.
I've tried really hard over the course of the last 30 years to become Scotty.
Yeah.
I've failed, but I'm tantalizingly close in some respects.
Well, he was the engineer on a nuclear submarine, so that's
There was that.
so.
There was that. There was no antimatter. The only crystals in evidence were Folger's crystals, though. I looked, and yeah, no, there were no dilithium on that boat at all.
So, in any event, let's go ahead and go through this. Let me take a quick look over at what's going on the YouTube chat to see if there's anything I need to.
And Chris, I'm on the chat, but I can't join it for some reason today, and I don't know why. So I'm not commenting yet.
I don't know why you can't join either.
But I don't think we should mess around with that. We're wasting people's time. If we
No. I always look to see if there's something there that I need to respond to. So, okay. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So here's the agenda. So I'm going to do the usual schedule slide that I do every time. We're going to talk a little bit about the caveats specific to this talk. And then I'm going to do a little bit of scoping about what we are and are not going to include. I gave you a little preview of that. Then let's talk a little bit about what is a replicator. And that's going to include some of the limits of a replicator, but then there's other limits of a replicator that's important to keep into account. A brief little timeline, which is mostly about vocabulary, to sort of, because we've got about 200 years of history in the relevant Star Trek shows that cover replicator and replicator-like things. And so they're not, first of all, they're not consistent because it's a set of TV shows, right? It's not even the same writers from show to show. And so it's a set of TV shows, but on top of that, the technology developed over time. There's a bunch of weirdnesses in there too that we'll talk about, some of which are just there because the writers thought it would be cool to put something in there without bothering to think about what the implications of it would be. We'll talk about a simple model that I'm going to point to that just sort of like, I want to use it to highlight some of the things that you should think about when thinking about replicators. And then we're going to go through a bunch of specific claims that I have heard made about replicators and explain why they're all wrong. And then next time we'll get into the nitty-gritty details about what a replicator actually is and how it works, at least according to Sternbach and Okuda. And we can talk about the specifics about what you can and can't do with it. Well, we're going to have a little bit of that this time, but the intent is not to get into the details of that this time.
And 2 points. One that I forgot to make on our intro slide. As Chris and I told you, we do have 3 young children in the house. And 2 adults. There may be a time when my lovely spouse cannot bilocate or trilocate, and I may have to quickly go away, and then I will come back. The second thing is, Chris has just hinted at something. That's one of the reasons I was excited to talk about this, which is that, so my wife writes science fiction, and I help with the world building, and my kind of entree into science fiction has been world building and has been sort of the synthesis of science and engineering with the science fiction while still telling a good story. And that has made me really appreciate what Sternbach and Okuda did with the replicator, to a lesser extent the transporter, but the replicator. They did a very good job in their own headcanon or in the canon we see in their manuals and their writing of not giving not handing the cast a press a button, solve a problem machine. Which is really
funny because both Stephen Ira Bear and Ronald Moore are on the record as saying that they hate the replicator because it takes away the ability of the scriptwriters to, it solves all the problems. To which my response is, you need to read the damn technical manual, guys.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Yeah, it really doesn't. It really doesn't.
Oh, you mentioned that your wife is a science fiction writer.
Truth.
By any chance, does she have a book coming out anytime soon?
She might. She's got a book coming out in November called Ringer. Let's say a coming of age story set in the rings of Saturn in the next couple of hundred years.
By any chance, would this be any related to any other books that she might have done in the past that maybe we talked about on the show?
We could. It is Chris has mentioned the Dabare snake launcher, which is sort of book 0. It's set several hundred years prior to the Ringer and somewhat in advance of our own future. And in that book, a bunch of people have to clean up orbital debris really, really quickly. And it involves a maglev launcher up the side of an active volcano, an angry volcano god, some other stuff.
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong?
So in any event, it just occurred to me that I probably should have been putting up a thing so that people can go pre-order. It comes out in like November, right?
Yes, it comes out in November.
So, but it's available for pre-order, so you can pre-order it.
Hang on. I got to show Dustin something. Dustin, you're killing me. I'm trying to figure out the Klingon ones. I'll get to the Cardi ones later.
Yeah, and I know that the Cardassian replicators, there's some interesting things in there, and like the Federation gave the Bajoran some replicators, and there's all sorts of interesting goodness in there that we'll just touch on this time, but we'll get to later on. The bit in the 2 different technical manuals actually do a really good job. A lot of that's the discussion about the what they gave to Bajor gives us an idea about what the limits are. And one of the overarching theme of the people who get replicators wrong is that if I have a replicator, there are no limits on anything anymore. And that is fundamentally just wrong. It's just wrong. So let's go ahead and do the general announcement. So no show next week. Trying to remember where I'm going to be next week, but I'm going to be someplace. Oh, I'm going to be at Capclave. I'm going to be at a science fiction convention next week. Boy, that's next weekend. Oh my God, I need to get my act together because I'm going to be there. And then I will be doing a show the week after that. And then on both the 4th and the 11th, no show. On the 4th, I'm going to be in Richmond looking at Civil War sites with some friends. And then on the 11th, I'm going to be at my niece's wedding. So my brother Delon, who is frequently in the comments section, his daughter is getting married. And so I will be there at the wedding. And then I expect that the next 3 weeks after that, I expect to be here. And then on the 8th, it's a probably, but there's some possibility of something getting in the way. And I to be honest, I don't even remember what that is. It's the Fall In Gaming Convention. I'm not currently planning on going to Fall In. I might change my mind on that. And then I know that I will be available on the 15th, or at least I expect to be. And then on the 22nd, I'll be at the PhilCon Science Fiction Convention. So probably saying hi to Bob there. So, this is currently what's in the queue. My guess is that the next thing, depending upon Andy's availability, it might be Replicators and Economics Part 2. Or if it's not that, it's probably going to be something like Space 1999 or the Handbook for Space Pioneers or something like that.
I need to not come on the show if I want to see the Space 1999 one. Got it. Thanks.
Well, I'm going to do it eventually. I need to, some of those one-offs, I need to 1 and 2 offs that I can do sort of by myself. I need to actually get my act together and get the presentation done so I can just have it in my hip pocket as opposed to doing the last minute scramble for stuff, which is frequently how it ends up. Let me turn off that banner. I think everybody's got the idea that...
you can't hear my typing, can you?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I'm trying to keep up with chat, and I don't want to...
No, go ahead and keep up with chat. So as usual, nothing that either Andy or I say should make you not enjoy something you currently enjoy. But, I will go so far as to say that I believe that disbelief should be suspended but not lynched. And as always, all the images are the property of their originators. We're doing this for critiquing purposes and for educational purposes. So through criticism and commentary, so none of these images are mine, right? I got all these images off the internet. Okay, so a couple of specific caveats for this one. So for sourcing, the understanding of transporters and replicators comes from Sternbach and Okuda, as always, with some commentary from Andy. The YouTube videos YouTube is basically where I got the mistaken claims here. I'm not going to specifically, because I am going to rag on the claims, I'm not going to tell you the exact name of where I got a big chunk of these, other than to point out that you can find it on YouTube, and there's a 4-part series in particular that is 4 different sessions of incorrect claims that are being made. So you should be able to find it pretty well. And that I should say about that particular YouTuber, some of the stuff he does, I think, is absolutely fantastic, but this is not. This wasn't one of them. So it's also worth pointing out that we know a lot about Starfleet. We know a lot about starships and other space-going infrastructure, but we don't know hardly much at all about planets and planetary economies and what replicators on planets can do, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a very, very skewed view of what technology is available to people. So, Andy, have you ever ridden on a helicopter?
Actually, no. But I'm a submariner.
Yeah, you're a submariner, so you're a lot less likely to ride on a helicopter. Have you flown the COD?
I have.
So you've flown on and off of an aircraft carrier.
Uh-huh.
I've flown on and off of an aircraft carrier. I've ridden on a helicopter. That went.
Oh wait, and yes, I have ridden on a helicopter because I was on shore leave in Hawaii, and I had 12 hours, and so I flew from Hawaii to Kauai, and I took the helicopter tour around the places on Kauai where they filmed.
Okay, the
Navy got me there. I wouldn't have been there, and I certainly would have had only 12 hours or 18 hours free.
So has your wife flown on a helicopter?
Mm-hmm. Quite a lot.
Yeah. So all of you out there watching, how many of you have flown on a helicopter?
Wright has.
And of the people who have, and so Wright says he's flown on a helicopter. Wright was in the Navy. My guess is Wright flew on a helicopter when he was in the Navy. If you're in the Navy and you're not a submariner and you did go to sea, chances are you've flown on a helicopter at one point or another. There's just a really good probability that at some point or another if you spend enough time in the Navy, you flew in a helicopter. Like my guess is that anybody in my neighborhood, if I went out there and started randomly knocking on doors, the only people that flew on helicopters were probably people that have been in the military. Now, so why do I care about helicopters? If you asked a bunch of the people I hang around with about whether they'd flown on a helicopter and didn't control for the fact that we all were associated with the military in some way, shape, or form, you would come away with a really skewed perception of how commonplace it was to fly in a helicopter. It's not that common at all. I know a lot of people have flown on helicopters, but it's not that common. And that's because we all had something in common that is specifically different than the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people in the Federation have probably never been on a starship, have never been on an antimatter powered vehicle, and maybe never touched a replicator. We don't know.
And that's an interesting point.
No.
And that's an interesting point.
And we also don't know what capabilities a Starfleet replicator has versus like a civilian model.
Civilian one. I mean, Cisco's dad runs a restaurant, and we know that he poo-poos replicated food, right?
Yeah.
So there is that.
But the thing is we know that there are replicators all over the Enterprise. in Voyager, et cetera, et cetera. We know that like every stateroom in Enterprise D seems to have a replicator. Do we think that every house has one? I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if you told me that a replicator was a big capital expense, and that the likelihood of having a replicator would be the same as having, say, an industrial freezer or an industrial oven.
Or eating freeze-dried food for every meal.
Yeah. I mean,
or
I know,
like specially packaged, like the way some of the astronauts used to eat.
My friend Wade decided he wanted a commercial grade oven. So when he and his ex-wife built a house, he got like commercial grade gear because Wade is a foodie and cooks a lot. And so he really wanted the high-end stuff. And his wife of the time was a lawyer who represented poor underprivileged clients like DuPont and Dow Chemical.
At least I wasn't drinking.
And so the comment was, she paid more in taxes than he made. And he was a GS-15. So he wasn't hurting. But so, I mean, they were 1%ers and they got some high-end stuff because he thought it was worth investing in. But, I don't have gear like that. And I'm never going to have gear like that in my kitchen. And I have no need for that. And so the question is, just because Cisco's dad talks about having, he knows what replicated food is like, that doesn't mean that he gets it at home. I just don't think we know.
Dustin asks, since when is DuPont a poor company? Dustin, that
was a joke.
Just in case there's something you don't understand about Chris, that, my friend, was sarcasm.
That was sarcasm.
You can tell it was sarcasm because Chris's lips are moving.
Yeah. Now TJ points out that the Picard Vineyard doesn't have one, and that's a sign of it being backward. But the Picard Vineyard is sort of a big thing, and I don't remember what was all associated with it.
But he also points out that the Riker's house has one, and Riker is a foodie. We know that. Yeah. So the thing is, Chris doesn't usually analyze New Trek, and I agree with him in that. I tend not to either. I either watch it and enjoy it, or watch it and don't. Or lately, I just stopped watching because I just don't have time. But I think when we get to the part of the talk where Chris is talking about misconceptions about the replicator, I think some of those misconceptions happened because the writers didn't understand their own material.
Well, I think that I'm not sure the writers understood that stuff, but Rick Sternbach certainly didn't.
No, that's what I mean. But Sternbach and Okuda don't get to control.
But I think in some cases it's people putting 2 and 2 together and getting 22. I really think there's a lot of that going on.
There is, but later Trek has turned the replicator more and more into a magic.
Yeah, and that's
make a thing machine.
And the other thing is Sternbach and Okuda. Somewhere, I forget, Andy can probably tell me exactly what page number it's on and which tech manual. They say, I think it's in the next gen tech manual. They say something to the extent of replicators are a recently new technology.
Yeah.
And so my mom, when she was a high school student, saw a microwave oven at the Iowa State Fair. And she said, someday I'm going to own a microwave oven. And that was in 1950 something. My family were not early adopters on anything, with one exception, and that was microwave ovens. When my mother got her first microwave oven, it was like 1973, 74, something like that, and my dad paid like $900 for it. It might have even been more expensive than that, because as he put it, Mom didn't ask for much. She said she really wanted this. And so he made it happen. And so if you think about what, this is like $3,000 in modern money for a microwave oven. nowadays, you can't quite get them out of vending machines because they're too big.
In Japan, you might be able to buy one out of a vending machine.
In Japan, you might be able to. It's amazing what you can get in vending. I mean, in an airport, you can get things like headphones and stuff out of vending machines in airports in the U.S. And so, it wouldn't surprise me if, for instance, at the beginning of next gen, replicators for home use were just unheard of, but by like the time of Picard, they were trivially inexpensive. And you went to the local Walmart and you bought a replicator for 100 credits or whatever. Now, somebody's about to say, but they don't have money there. Okay, we're not going to get into whether they have money or not. I will, other than to say, we're going to talk about the concept of scarcity and whether and how scarcity applies. And if at any point you have scarcity, you have to have some way of allocation. And the easiest way to allocate is through something that, for all practical purposes, is money, right? It's some way of for people to express their preferences and how much they care in order to get it. So there's probably something that functions like money, at least part of the time. The feral historian, who I kind of run hot and cold on, but the feral historian, if you look up his talk on replicators, he goes into sort of the economics of Star Trek and how this all works. So I will mention him by name because I think his thing is definitely worth listening to. And I'm not convinced that I have to listen to it like another 2 or 3 times and sort of sit down and read some of the books that he referenced and stuff like that. But I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there.
And it's worth noting that I did actually have the page. So it's on page 90 of the tech manual.
Of the Next Gen Tech Manual?
Of the Next Gen Tech Manual, where it says that recent advances in transporter-based molecular synthesis have resulted in a number of significant spin-off technologies. Chief among these are transporter-based replicators.
Yeah.
So, and this is, I'm only going to get into this a little bit, but what it looks like a replicator is, at least in this book, and in the conception of the guys who came up with the dumb thing, is it's a 3D printer that uses transporter technology. Right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways that changes how you would do 3D printing, because the dumb thing can tailor make atoms at a very steep price, but it can, in energy. But the dumb thing can tailor make atoms. It's worthwhile noting that the book, that's the Next Gen Tech Manual, Chris quotes it all the time, was written from the perspective of the Galaxy Class Development Project, which was announced in 2343, according to this, and the Enterprise flew in 2363. So, so the beginning of TNG is basically 2363, early 2364. I'd have to go look it up. Mm-hmm. That might place some interesting, that's 20 years from announcement to second hull. I think Enterprise was the second hull. Yamato was Enterprise was the third hull, maybe. But that's a long time. That's enough time for a more specialized technology to make its way into the consumer market. Households, right? I'm not trying to make a statement about how Star Trek does money.
Yeah, might be enough time, might not be. And there's also, we haven't gotten into to the energy issue yet, other than I'll point out that on this page, it does say in the corner, antimatter stores energy, it doesn't create energy.
And TJ points out that Keiko's family had one when they were growing up, and that's entirely possible.
Okay.
Obviously, the TNG Tech Manual is not canon anymore. Elements of it, at least, are not canon. It's just, I kind of base all my thinking about Trek on that and what I know from my day job building nuclear thermal and nuclear electric rockets. Because for my money, the TNG Tech, the 2 Sternbach-Okuda Tech Manuals are the place where somebody sat down with the finest pencil they could get and really tried to noodle out how all this stuff would work.
Yeah. Now, TJ pointing out that Keiko's family had one, that actually sometimes that goes to the second bullet I have there, which is the writers frequently will just throw stuff in. They think they're adding flavor. I think they're breaking the setting. And because mostly because they never follow through with the full-on implications of their work, right? The writers will add stuff that you go, well, if that's true, then there's all these other things we should be seeing, but we don't see them. And so why do we think that that's true? So, all right, let's move on to the next slide, which is what we are going to talk and are not going to talk about, which we've already started doing. We're going to talk about what a replicator is and isn't, but we're not going to go into the in-universe details of how they work. We're going to sort of touch on that stuff, but we're not going to go deep into the nitty-gritty. We can do that later.
And in terms of what a replicator is and is not,
the
statement, some of the stuff in chat, some stuff TJ and I didn't get the other name. Hi, Delon. Some of the stuff that they're saying, remember, replicator is one thing. Replicator is thing that makes stuff. Transporter-based replicator is the thing Chris and Sternbach and Okuda are asserting is a relatively recent invention.
Yeah.
So just because Miles O'Brien's mom and Keiko's mom had replicators at home, they didn't. That doesn't mean that doesn't invalidate our statement or Sternbach and Okuda's statement that transporter-based replicators are new.
Well, and as we'll see, I mean, we know back in the original series they had something called a food synthesizer, right? If you go back one. You feed it a piece of cheese, and it'll turn the piece of cheese into something else. Apparently,
is that the same prop they used for the data cards?
Yeah.
Is that food?
That was what the joke somebody made. Is that the computers on Star Trek, you had to feed them a piece of cheese every now and then to get them to work. And I don't know. I saw the Star Trek exhibit when it was at the Smithsonian. Those things are pieces of wood. I mean, all of these things, when you get up close and you see it up close, you go, oh my God. Like the Klingon belts was like a standard
U.S. Navy-ish or military issue belt.
Yeah, with the fabric belt with the slider, except on the belt buckle, they had cut out a piece of bubble wrap and glued it on place and spray painted it gold. Yep. Just to give it some texture.
I love it.
And all the Klingon hand weapons were like clearly somebody had just like gotten a belt sander and a knife and had just like whittled them out, like, you know, and because you could see the grain of the wood underneath the paint.
And on the remaster of TOS, you can see that there's a couple of places where they zoom in close to the helm console and you can see the wood grain on the back of the helm console. Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why I'm told, and this is an old data point now, but I'm told that a lot of stars, like Katie Couric, for instance, had a no HD clause in her contract. Because, you know, the higher the definition, the harder it is to hide stuff. So, but it's also funny how none of these things are ever marked. Like at one point, Nurse Chapel, one of the episodes with kids, they all want something and they just like randomly grab, I want such and such, and they randomly pull a card. None of them are marked, but they all got the thing they wanted. It was weird. Okay, so
one of my alternate headcanons. We're gonna go really far in the weeds. In Star Trek: The Motion Picture, there's a piece of gear on Sulu's helm console that says neural interface. Because for Star Trek Phase 2, there was going to be a mind reading. There was going to be something he put on when the ship had to do something really complicated, right? So the ship was going to be there. There was going to be a cybernetic interface, a direct mind link, and so part of my headcanon is that the reason why those TOS displays make absolutely no sense is because every crewman has cyberware that lets them that basically the displays aren't for us, they're for the crew, and the crew is reading the displays. And that if you had that cyberware, everything on all the displays on TOS would make a lot more sense.
Yeah, Scott Westerfeld's Succession series, which is the Hidden Empire and the Killing of Worlds. It was a 2-book series that frequently you can find in hardcover altogether. Has this idea that most of the displays are actually blank, and that it's all an overlay. And like you have something called air mousing, so you're moving your hands around and the computer's picking it up what you're doing, but you're not actually touching anything. And so the purpose of a display panel is not that it's actually the display, it's the place where the computer puts the thing that you need to look at, and you know that when you turn and you look at it, the computer will display the information for you there. And so it's like having a convenient green screen nearby that you can look at for the information you want.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we're going to talk about what replicators can do and not do, and the economics of it in a very narrow sense, but we're not going to talk about how the Federation economy works, or even if the Federation economy works.
Imagine that with a 10-meter cattle prod.
Yeah, that's a very interesting subject. But there have been entire books written on the subject, and the answer, I think it's fair to say that if you spend a lot of time, go watch the Feral Historian on this. If you spend a lot of time, you can come up with a story that is consistent with most of what we see on screen. But if all you do is try to take what we see on screen and sort of put, if you don't bring in stuff from the outside world, you can't make any of it make sense, because they simultaneously say things like, we don't have money, and then they talk about using money. And I will say one thing. I have this working hypothesis that Jean-Luc Picard is the most unreliable narrator known to man. And it is worth pointing out that all these times when Jean-Luc Picard, he's the guy who always gets cited about, the Federation is about bettering yourself, et cetera, et cetera. So 2 thoughts. One is, I think he may be the most idealistic Starfleet officer we've ever met, at least up until the point where Starfleet crushed him. And the second thing is, every time he's saying something like that, think about who the audience is. He's always talking to somebody who is not a Federation citizen. It's usually somebody from the past, either because he's gone back in time and he's talking to them, or because they found their ship and they've been frozen on board the ship for the last 200 years. So Jean-Luc Picard seems to have a policy of, I'm going to lie to these people. I'm going to tell them the story that we tell 4th graders. I'm not going to tell them, I'm going to tell them that planets are in circular orbits. I'm not going to talk about what they really look like.
I don't know. I think it was TJ's talk, right? I think it was TJ's idea, where he said basically something to the effect of, there's a reason that Starfleet gave this dude the flagship, and he spends his entire career on a big giant exploratory cruiser. Like 3/4 of his missions are between Federation member worlds solving little diplomatic problems, it seems like. Not doing the main mission of the Galaxy class, because he was the Federation's poster boy.
Yeah, yeah. He's the guy who it's like the Federation is perfect. So, we're not going to get into how a Heisenberg we are going to talk about how a Heisenberg compensator works. It works very well. Thank you very much. We're not going to get into exactly what that means, not even in part 2. We are going to talk about how to think about replicators a little bit. And in fact, that's my goal, is to how to think about these things and what claims are made and why they're wrong. Now, 2 fundamental points. Actually, I guess 3. The first is that when you say post-scarcity economy, you should really say post-material scarcity economy.
Yeah.
And the second is that it does not mean it's about basic necessities. It doesn't mean there's no scarcity, because there's always things that are inherently going to be scarce. And I don't, anybody who had to deal with a university computing platform back in the day understands that they put the new hard drive on, and now they've doubled the capacity of the system. And within about a month, they're asking people to delete files they don't need anymore, because wants always expand to the space available. But that's not the only thing that's going on here. The other thing that's going on here is that there are things that are beyond material needs that are always going to be scarce, and we're going to talk about those a little bit.
And there's another point to make there, which is that while mass and energy are convertible, Chris said material scarcity. He did not say...
I didn't say energy.
The end of material scarcity. He didn't say the end of energy scarcity.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the funny things I hear people say. It's like, they'll say like, well, if you've got the energy, and we have infinite, they have, I mean, this one guy literally said, and the Federation has infinite energy. No, they don't. No, they don't. And part of it was, even at the level of, they should just go to a star system and turn the replicators loose and have them build a Dyson sphere, and every star should have a Dyson sphere around it. The Federation has a technology to put a Dyson sphere around every star. And it's like, no, you can't just hand wave that stuff away. Replicators are not magic. Replicators are really, really powerful machines as they are described, but they do have limitations. Okay, so what is a replicator? It's a device, the replicators that we're talking about here are devices that are using technology similar to a transporter to reconfigure matter using processes that probably are heavily quantum. But we're not going to go into all of that stuff tonight. They are based upon, there's always been, since the earliest days of Star Trek, they have had something that could manipulate matter in ways that are useful to allow you to produce things. The Making a Star Trek book talks about how their uniforms aren't cleaned. Their uniforms are basically tossed into something. They get processed back. The fibers get all separated. The dirt gets flushed out of it. And then they basically take the raw material of all the fibers and they make them a new uniform. And how does that work? Very well, thank you. There's no explanation for any of that. But that goes back to the Making a Star Trek book. And so they've always had something, right? The replicators that you see in the original series, on the one hand, they look an awful lot kind of like the transporter-based things, but we don't know exactly what's going on behind that door. One of the things we do know, though, is that apparently tribbles can get into the system, which tells me that that isn't a transporter-based system. That when you have the door open and Kirk's chicken sandwich and coffee has tribbles all over it, that doesn't seem to me like that is a transporter-based system, if for no other reason than it's not quantum resolution and the tribbles would all be dead.
No, and we're already talking about 3D. Folks in your chat probably know more about this than I do, but we're already talking about 3D printing organs. The space station has a 3D printer. Navy submarines, Navy carriers, I think forward operating bases even may have Navy carrier or may have 3D printers. We're talking about 3D printing organs. People are talking about 3D print or about using 3D printer derived technology to do food. Bob points out that it parallels the apparently absurdly efficient recyclers on board spacecraft in the Expanse. And I got to tell you, Bob, those insanely efficient recyclers NASA is working on as we speak.
Yeah, and there's an insanely efficient recycler on the ISS even as we speak.
Yeah, like the ISS can recycle, it's not everything, but the ISS recycles 98% of the water used on board the ship. ISS, International Space Station.
Yeah.
They hit that milestone, I want to say, last year.
Yeah, and There was something else I was going to say about this.
The challenge now is, okay, now we got to do it for everything else to include all, like you want to do it for all waste streams. This is one of the reasons I work space after I got out of the Navy, because I'm a big believer in surviving, but surviving in style. And if we can close all these loops on a spacecraft a million miles from home, then we could probably figure out a way to be a little bit more efficient with our resource utilization on Earth too, which I think is probably going to improve everybody's quality of life.
One of my, and one of the things we're not really going to go into tonight, because I didn't think about it until now, is that there's a very, very heavy emphasis. I mean, the replicators imply de-replicators, right? Replicators imply the ability to use the same technology to tear something apart. It implies the same technology is available to be the ultimate recycler. And Sternbach and Okuda specifically talk about that in both of those tech manuals. They talk about being able to reprocess like 90% of the stuff. Basically, they just sort of gets sort of sorted by molecule and goes off to where it goes. And then there's a small percentage of stuff where they go, this stuff is really dangerous. We need to convert it into something else. And actually, what I don't understand with that part is for the really dangerous stuff, it talks about just converting it into carbon atoms. So they can do some transmutation. That we also know from what the things they say that would be really energy intensive. I don't understand why they don't just transport it into the sun or something like that and get rid of it that way. Andy, you're on mute.
Transporters are also horrifically energy intensive. So we do not know the trade-off between, gee, I'm gonna turn this piece.
We don't know whether it's more cost effective to do transmutation or to do transportation.
Right. Am I gonna take this piece of plutonium and turn it into iron? Or am I gonna take this piece of plutonium and send it 50,000 miles? And that's the other thing.
I think we can infer the answer to that question.
Well, yes and no. The range on Federation transporters isn't sufficient. Like, transporter range is within the corona of the star, even on a relatively modest star like our sun. So you probably wouldn't, like, look, we did that on, like, you do that on ships, right? You've got like, there's just stuff.
You could have a trash disposal unit that uses
trash disposal torpedo. They could
basically all you need is something that's got a tractor beam that's set to pressure mode and it just shoots it out. Yeah.
Actually, no, that's what they would do.
I think we do know the answer to the transmutation versus transportation problem, because I think the answer is that if it were as energy intensive as transporting, they spend a lot of time transporting. I think they would do more transmutation if it was easier, if it was that cheap to do it. So I was going to say, one of my favorite discussions of replicator technology, not involving a Star Trek replicator, is in the book Gravity Dreams by Elie Modisette. In his universe, everything is based on nanotechnology, but you end up with the exact same conversations that you have people in Star Trek having. Like the comment, well, at one point he comments that the food's really good. And in fact, it's just about perfect, and it tastes exactly the same every time. And he likes making tea by hand, because one of the things about tea, not only is there the ritual of making it, right? But there's also the fact that every pot of tea that's brewed by hand tastes a little bit different. And part of the enjoyment of the tea is the fact that it's not this monolithic experience.
Uh-huh.
And you hear characters on Star Trek say very similar things.
Truth.
So it's worth pointing out the resolution of the scan is important. You've got this differentiation between quantum, which is what you need for transporters, and molecular. And this is the explanation as to why you can't store people and just churn out copies of people. Let's just ignore the fact that the transporter frequently churns out copies of people by accident, which okay, but it shouldn't.
It's not made to do that.
If you believe all the rest of it, it shouldn't. Let me rephrase that. If you believe all the rest of it, right? Okay, so Thomas Riker gets created. If they know what happened, shouldn't they be able to replicate that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if I understand the phenomenon, the Federation science is tremendously powerful. If I understand what the random environmental phenomenon was that caused something to occur, I should be able to recreate that. And now I've got that in my hip pocket, and and if I want to, I can create people. Everybody can have a twin. And, the fact that you could do in the episode with the evil Kirk early on, the fact that they could use the transporter to smush them back together again, doesn't that imply what you see in David Brin's Kiln People, where in the morning you can spin off a copy? I got a lot of work to do. It'd be really useful if there were two of me, so there will be. And there's two of you that go out and do stuff, and then at the end of the day, you come back and you're reunited. Now, it's all really, really expensive because it's very energy intensive. But, if Starfleet's willing to pay for a transporter to transport people around, my guess is under certain circumstances, they'd be more than willing to duplicate somebody. Wouldn't it be nice to have two Jean-Luc Picards running around?
And the funny thing is, the Federation's big enough that they might never know.
Maybe there are two Jean-Luc Picards running around. For all we know, they do this all the time.
I hate that kind of stuff, though. Aesthetically, I'm not saying, just aesthetically, that is not my cup of tea.
There's a whole bunch. Star Trek is full of technology that has implications that they never explore. So the quantum versus molecular stuff is important because random bit errors. It's described as it's like radiation damage. If you do it with living tissue, it's the equivalent of severe radiation damage. And so you need to have quantum resolution to do biological stuff. And that's why you can't, the computer storage requirements are too heavy. So basically a transporter is not a purely digital process. It's got a lot of analog components to it.
Yeah.
And so that's why you can't really store people. They talk about the matter stream, right? And so basically the end result is you can't just store somebody off the disk because you don't have enough disk space.
Well, they can't store anything. So that's the key difference in the setting material. That's how they tried to explain why they couldn't replicate people, or life forms, or even other complicated things, not just people and life forms. A lot of the stuff that you'll discover that a lot of the stuff that can't be replicated, it can't be replicated because it has some fundamental funky quantum property that that the replicator just can't work with. And the reason why is that the transporter, like Chris says, is an analog device. They effectively store the quantum states in the, quote, matter stream. So they don't break you down all the way, I don't think, is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
How that works, no idea. The replicator, though, is working off a stored template. But to go on to the next bullet here, it's working on a stored template off of a feedstock that the ship carries in a tank. Or a feedstock that is, my tool is broken. I put it in the replicator. The replicator goes, hey, great. I got almost everything I need. There's a couple of particles missing because the Klingon broke the hammer in half. So I'm going to grab some iron from the iron cabinet in the and the utility support systems on the Enterprise, and I'm going to add that iron into the matrix, and I'm going to re-beam basically this thing into its original form. Here you go.
Yeah, and it's grabbing iron because if it had to, it could create iron, but it's a lot easier. It's more cost effective to start off with something that's really close.
And let me give you, and so we don't usually talk numbers on the show. Let me give you a couple of numbers though. If memory serves, the Starship Enterprise carries about 2,000 kilograms, 2 tons of antimatter fuel. And that's actually quite a lot of antimatter. It's a ridiculous amount of antimatter. But remember, mass and energy are convertible. A kilogram of antimatter converted into pure energy is something like, it's 10 to the 16th. So that's
big.
Call it 2 mega. That's a megajoule of energy. You could do it in terawatts. It's like 1,000 terajoules of energy. It's a lot. It's a put it this way: photon torpedoes have a maximum yield of about 64 megatons, and they only detonate about a kilogram of antimatter, if memory serves. And so, if you want to make, like, let's say I want to make a hammer. The hammer weighs a kilogram. You are consuming a very, very large fraction of the ship's fuel to do that. That's the only place that energy can come from.
Yeah. And
does that make any sense to anybody? Chat?
Yeah, and I think you're tweaking quantum states. We'll get into this more in the next episode.
So the place where the replicators actually are making matter out of energy, they try to do that just as little as they possibly can. It's like, oh, garbage. I need this rare isotope that doesn't exist in my tank. Okay, I'm going to make this one atom of this one rare isotope and stick it here in the lattice because it was missing. Yeah. Hopefully that made some sense. If it didn't, hit us up in the chat, and I'll try again later after a suitable delay.
And it also talks about how like the food replicator feedstock. I mean, you've got food replicator feedstock, and you've got non-food replicator feedstock, right? And so the food replicator feedstock, if you think about what most food is made out of, it's, you get to see what most food is made out of both before you eat it and after you eat it. And so they do a lot of sewage processing, et cetera, and just run it back through the system. It's sort of interesting. One of the things I noticed is when I went looking for images of Star Trek replicators, virtually every single thing was a food replicator image. That's why there are all food replicator images in this slide deck, because that's what they offered me. That's what they offered me about it. Let's see. It's very energy intensive. It's a lot easier to, as we said, a lot easier to modify something that's close to what you want for the final form. And in fact, I think Andy found something somewhere that says if you want to do 3 grams of matter, it's like 3.7 kilograms of deuterium equivalent.
Yeah, and
fusion energy.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the science of energy, we can talk about this more later, but as a spoiler for the next talk, the science of energy conversion, basically every fuel you know about, whether it's the gasoline you put in your car or the matter-antimatter that the Enterprise uses, converts mass into energy. It's just what fraction of the mass you stuck in the engine is getting converted. With nuclear power, fission or fusion, you're converting about 0.1% of the mass of the fuel that you burn into energy. With matter-antimatter, you're doing it all. But this is the reason why when Gene Roddenberry and the people in the 60s went to Jet Propulsion Lab to say, hey, we want to make a starship that goes faster than light. How do you do that? They go, yeah, we don't know. But if you wanted to, like, what would you think? Like, what is even possible? Well, you probably need to bend space. That's going to take a ridiculous amount of energy. the highest density energy storage medium we can think of is antimatter. There you go. Warp, and done.
And storage medium, because when you
all fuel is a storage medium, right? All fuel is a storage medium.
But the question is, what differentiates antimatter from oil, other than the numbers involved, is the fact that antimatter is made out of whole cloth, whereas oil, there's oil there, right? I pump the oil out.
Yeah, you and I've talked about this before. I haven't thought about it too much. Yeah, chat, I'm going to run through, like Andy's going to think on air. This could go really, really badly. But here you go. So oil. The sun burns nuclear fuel, hydrogen, proton chain in its core, makes sunlight. The sunlight hits the earth. Plants convert it into long chain carbon molecules. They die. They get crushed. That adds, that rarefies and condenses the energy into finer and finer, more dense, energy dense forms. We pull it out, we burn it. Starfleet, the sun burns fusion fuel, makes sunlight. Starfleet has big giant solar collectors. They use, what the hell do they call it? Quantum charge flipping devices.
Yes.
To flip matter. So I think they're just probably using deuterium or they're mining gas giants for deuterium fuel all the time. So they probably just
and they talk about
flip it over to the solar panels, use the quantum charge flipper on it. It's a refining process. They're just refining it. It takes a ridiculous amount of, the difference I think you were going to go for is, and I don't know the energetics on oil, but the energetics, like Sternbach and Okuda correctly say that the energetics on antimatter is like you don't get more energy out than you put in to make the
you do for oil,
but you do so that I haven't read it. So the refining process,
it's like a factor of 5 or a factor of 10, and that's actually one of the reasons why oil sands and things like that, oil shale, oil sands, is not as good as just like Saudi Arabian oil.
Got it.
Saudi Arabian oil, I just pump it out of the ground. With oil sands, I have to put so much energy into it that the multiplication factor is only like a factor of 2 or a factor of 3.
Is worse. Okay, just understand though that the sun does the actual energy production, the generation step.
Yes.
And by the way, it's using a fuel too. But the sun does the energy generation step in both those processes. It's just nature gives us a couple more refining steps in the oil process.
Yes. The difference is not it all comes from the sun. The difference is I can find oil, and when I find the oil, if I spend about 10% of the energy that I'm going to get out, I can refine the oil into something. I can spend a little bit of energy refining it and get 10 times the energy back from what I get in.
Yes.
With antimatter,
not so.
I can convert energy from like fusion fuel, solar, whatever, into something else that is a lot more dense, but basically I have to use that much energy to get it.
And that's why I think.
So that's why I call antimatter a battery, and there's a lot of people that argue with that.
I don't think you should do that. I don't think that adds value, but we can talk about that later. The thing is, the Federation's oil is deuterium, not antimatter.
Yeah.
That we can agree on, because deuterium, when you find it in the ground, has about 1 million times more energy. Well, you find it in the atmospheres of gas giants or other places. Has about 1 million times more energy in it than any reasonably abundant chemical fuel.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm moving on to the next slide. Other limits that we know about. Andy talked about all the different things that for whatever reason it doesn't work. We know that latinum doesn't work at molecular resolution levels. So you can transport it, but you can't duplicate it. Dilithium, anti-deuterium is mentioned as something that you can't replicate. And it also talks about how certain spices, like I think it said alterum,
they become toxic.
They become mildly toxic. And so there's actually something that prevents you from doing that, which is actually an important thing. You have to scan these things, right? So if you're going to make something, at some point you have to scan it, which means there's a computer somewhere that gets to decide what it is and whether it's going to replicate it or not. Now, there's certain things that we know that they don't normally replicate. Alcohol is one. They talk about synthanol instead of alcohol, in that if you want actual alcohol, you have to like go and tweak it. And every now and then people complain about how they don't think that the synthetic alcohol is as good as the regular alcohol, but it has the advantage that it doesn't leave you hungover. There's nutritional stuff. Counselor Troy at one point says, I want a real chocolate sundae. I don't want that thing that you normally make, computer. I want a real chocolate sundae. That tells me that there's a little bit of Big Brother going on there. There's a little bit of the computer saying, no, you're not authorized for that. Now, why is that the case? Is it because nutritionally a real chocolate sundae is not as nutritious as this other thing? You know, it's got other deleterious health effects or something like that? Or is it just because, like, you know, this is easier to replicate? It's less energy intensive to replicate. It's more cost effective to replicate this other thing that's usually good enough, right? It's sort of like the equivalent of like everything the replicator makes is the fat-free version of stuff. I think there's something that said that like it won't make a poison. You can't just go to the replicator and say, make me some sarin. Presumably.
One hopes.
There's probably stuff that it won't make because it's too energy expensive. When you go beyond food, right? That it's too it's like, dude, no, I'm not gonna make you that because that would be really expensive. And so you need to have the captain sign off on that.
Well, and that's a whole nother.
Yeah.
I mean, my goodness, computer security, we might have to add that to the things that are magic about Star Trek. Management science is the science that makes it science fiction, and cybersecurity. Like, remember the story with the kid who was the only survivor of a space wreck?
Yeah, Charlie X.
And he's like, I bumped into a panel and I blew up the ship. And eventually Data's like, dude, every panel on this ship knows who you are, knows what you're authorized to do, and knows that you're not authorized to blow up the ship. Like, the toilet flush panel knows that you're not authorized to blow up.
Not the episode I thought, but yeah.
But yeah.
Well, and I mean, if the computer can figure out that Riker's butt is not actually inputting an order, it can probably figure out that a given human being is not allowed to blow up the ship. So, and you know, my guess is if you tried to replicate a phaser, it probably wouldn't let you.
Not without permission. And I'm not even sure, like, it's not one of the limits that we don't understand, and we're going to get there, is can the thing replicate something as complicated as a phaser? I don't know.
Well, we do know.
You guys remember, chat?
We do know, it says in Sternbach and Okuda, it does say that there are certain things, certain parts it's more cost effective to actually have parts stockpiled than it is to replicate them.
And for cost effective, guys, read energy.
Yes.
Energy cost, right? It's just,
yes.
Man, we really don't want to burn like we'd have to burn a kilogram of the ship's fuel to replicate this on board. So we're going to carry spares.
And I suspect that a large chunk of what's going on there is, well, first of all, they talk about molecular resolution and they talk about quantum resolution. Do we really think the resolution knob only has two settings? Or do we think that there's some stuff in between?
Yeah. And
it gets increasingly, you eventually get to the point where it's like, okay, we can't do that anymore. But my guess is that there's some stuff in between where you can actually, it's like, okay, that's going to be really, really expensive for us to do it that way, but we could if we had to.
And one thing, chat, like I don't know that they ever said this online in televised canon, and I'd be interested if anybody can remember them doing it. one of the like the reason
TJ,
you can't replicate latinum is, and I'm not gonna get the quote right, but it exists. Part of latinum exists out of 4-dimensional space-time, and the replicator can't predict quantum mechanically. It's kind of like they kind of sound like it's Heisenberg. It's just physics says, sorry, you just can't predict how much of latinum is in your space-time at this time in order to replicate it correctly. And if you get it wrong, it's not latinum, it's something else. And it says so. Like latinum is on the 4th periodic table extended or something like that. And it implies, and they apply this like very few times in the series, in the various series over the years, that the periodic table in Star Trek is really big and really weird in a way that we do not understand, big and weird. And this book is lousy, just lousy, with materials that, to the best of my knowledge, don't exist. Like elemental materials, elements that don't exist, states of matter.
So for what it's worth, we haven't really talked about this, but the replicator is not invented by Star Trek. The replicator, as near as the earliest instance I remember reading about something that was a replicator was George O. Smith's Venus Equilateral series. They have exactly the same thing where they've got this machine that can duplicate stuff, and at some point they go like, oh shit, I can make as much gold as I want. We're going to crash the economy. And so before they turned this new invention loose, they had to figure out, what are we going to use for money? And the answer was they found something that they couldn't replicate. And that became the new basis for the coinage. And so with Latinum,
I'm not going to talk about money.
Latinum, I think the issue is, I mean, they went to this elaborate explanation. You could go just as far as like, yeah, you get all these bit errors and it's obvious that it's counterfeit. It's like, yeah, I can photocopy a dollar bill, but that doesn't give me a dollar bill. Incidentally, there's a persistent claim that photocopiers have a thing that detect if you're trying to photocopy money. That would be really interesting if true, and very applicable to this conversation. So, all right, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Here's the simple replicator timeline. In Enterprise, we hear about the protein resequencer. In the original series, they talk about the food synthesizer. I don't know if they ever used the phrase replicator, but you had the food synthesizer. And then by next gen, you've got this replicator thing that as Andy points out, is recently developed.
And let's remember, transporter-based replicators.
Yes, transporter-based replicators.
So,
and apparently you can buy a Star Trek food replicator in Second Life. That's what's there in the lower left-hand corner. So I thought that was fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about a simple model. This obviously is an early 21st century replicator, known as a 3D printer. It places molecules where you want them with a much lower level of precision, but that's basically what it is. Needs power to work, right? So,
and feedstock.
Replicators in Star Trek need power to work. This needs power to work. Needs control software to make the print head go where you want it to. So it needs precise control during assembly. And then it also needs to have a thing that you're replicating, right? So it needs to have a blueprint, a pattern of some sort to replicate. And then it needs something that it uses to get the molecules to put in the right position. It needs feedstock of some sort. And the feedstock has to have a certain quality to it, right? If you've got junky feedstock, it won't work. And it limits what you can do with it as a result of that. Now, one of the things I didn't put on here, but anybody who's been a 3D printer guy for a while, I am not a 3D printer guy, but Andy and I both have a really good friend named Brian Haven, who's, oh my God, a 3D printer guy. And Rob Davidoff, who's been on the show before, is another 3D printer guy.
And Tom Pope is a 3D printer guy too.
And Tom Pope is a 3D printer guy. And they will all tell you, it's getting better, but they will all tell you that this is a finicky machine. This requires a lot of tweaking to make it work, right? If you under certain circumstances, the stuff will cool in the print head, and now you've got this junky plastic mess that you have to sort of get out of the print head. And some feedstock is more likely to do that than other feedstock. And it's not unusual for you to get partway through a print job and you go and you check on your print job and it's like, what the hell happened here? No, stop, restart it, because it just like lost lock on where it was. And now it's just sort of spraying, it's clearly not printing in the right place. And, all these mechanical parts have to be maintained, right? There's pulleys and things in tension, et cetera, and all these things require periodic adjustment. One of the miracles of Star Trek is everything in Star Trek is sort of self-maintaining, but these are all finicky precision machines. And there's
Chris
no reason to think that when you start talking about molecular resolution, you're going to make that any less true.
I think it's possible that the stuff in Star Trek isn't as self-maintaining as you often say. I think it's just observation bias, because stories of dudes do. Look, I was a nuclear submarine officer for 22 years. Stories of dudes doing maintenance are usually really, really boring. They're really, really boring. We
know from the holy book of Sternbach and Okuda, that there's a lot of just routine, level 2 diagnostic stuff.
But we know that the warp coils have to be neutron purged at intervals.
Yeah.
See the ship pull into the Remler array. There's going to be stuff on a smaller level that you're going to have to do every so often. And most of their gear solid state, right?
Totally and completely agree.
But the only moving parts on that thing might be the doors.
Yeah.
But I don't have to squint very much to insert maintenance between the episodes. It doesn't.
No, I don't either. And just like we don't, there's a lot more paperwork that gets done in that universe than we ever see either.
Right. You enjoyed doing PMS?
Somebody said they enjoyed.
Sure, you were in the Navy?
I think what Wright is saying is that he likes spending some quality time alone with his gun.
No, and actually, I was an officer, so I did not. Wright worked for. It sounds like Wright worked for a living.
He did.
But yeah, I always enjoyed the part of our day where we got to crack gear open and see if it was working and that stuff.
I once heard a guy who had been an engineer, a Chang on a surface ship, say that he had entirely the wrong attitude for being an engineer. He loved it when stuff broke because then he could take it apart. And another friend of mine made the comment. He was somebody Paul Weber. He made the comment that when he was Chang on a minesweeper, if the chiefs weren't moving fast enough and getting problems solved, Paul would get a toolkit with tools just sort of randomly thrown in so that they'd rattle when he walked, and he'd make a point of walking by the goat locker, the chief's mess, and you'd hear things like such and such. Mr. Weber is heading down to engineering and he has a tool bag. That was the sign that he used to no, really, I want this fixed now. Okay, acid reflux. I've got a new allergist. I see him on Monday. I'm going to get stuck a lot, and then I'll get allergy shots and I'll stop coughing. Okay, so here's all the different claims. This is the last slide. It shouldn't take us more than an hour and a half to go through this slide. Although we've
gone through it already.
Yeah, we've gone through a lot of it already. First claim I heard was replicators can make replicator fuel, and so basically they're essentially self-fueling. They're powered by fusion. You just make replicator fuel. Now, part of this was all in the he's the one I'm thinking of started off with replicators automatically equal individual self-sufficiency, and a lot of this was sort of an argument based upon supporting that. And it's like, okay, maybe replicators can make replicator fuel, and maybe replicators can make fusion reactors, but I have no reason to think that means I can use a replicator to make and assemble a fusion reactor in my house. And maybe that's overkill, or maybe
there are
not.
limits to they mention limits. Build volume is one of them, but replicator fuel would violate a couple of laws of thermodynamics.
Yeah, I'd be really surprised if I could make deuterium without using at least an equal amount of deuterium in energy. And by equal amount,
using more,
maybe a factor of 20.
Yeah, basically, unless Star Trek is really breaking physics, and like the replicators borrowing energy from subspace or something, which you could do, or borrowing quantum vacuum energy somehow, which you could do, but they never say. If the only energy that goes into the replicator came from a deuterium fusion reactor, then that's what we're talking about. You got to have enough fuel to keep powering the fusion reactor, and so that's powering the replicator. And so if you burn a kilogram of fuel to power the replicator, physics says, unless Star Trek is breaking this particular law of physics, which would be pretty big, you're going to get less than a kilogram of fuel out of the replicator that you pumped a kilogram of fuel's worth of power into. Does that make sense?
And it might be a lot less.
I think it's going to be a lot less.
I do too. In fact, we've got that one data point that says 3.7 kilograms of deuterium to make 3 grams of matter.
Yeah.
And so, maybe the answer is if you start with water, it's better, right? I'm just sort of cracking the water or something. Somebody else also talked about making solar panels to power it. So I'll spread solar panels out. Well, okay, so what's the power number on that?
Yeah, right? The problem with that is power density.
Yeah.
Yes, you could definitely do that.
Maybe like, I just need to put out a small solar field. And by small, I mean like half the size of the state of Nebraska.
But you could do that in space. You could,
people are
talking about that.
People are talking about like, I'm just going to go out and live in the woods someplace.
Oh, right.
With my replicator.
Yeah, that would kind of be a problem.
And I don't think it works like that. I don't think you can make replicator fuel. I don't think it automatically equals self-sufficiency because, first of all, we don't know how much replicators cost. They're high precision machines. They've got to be expensive. Now, you don't have to have money to be expensive. Let's just dodge that. Expensive just means that they're scarce for some reason, and it could be that it's really hard to make them, or they require a lot of technical expertise to keep running. There's no reason to think that this is something that's as easy as buying a set of steak knives.
Right.
And as cheap as buying a set of steak knives, or that, I'm going to have all the appropriate feedstock to be able to replicate my own. Like if it requires molybdenum, where do I get the molybdenum? Or something like that. And if this were easy, there's no reason to think it's easy. Replicators also don't mean no scarcity, because there's things beyond material scarcity that's out there. Somebody talked about, maybe a feral historian talked about, maybe Captain Pike gets this place out in Montana because it's just an empty area, and he said, "Is anybody using this?" And nobody wanted to, and there's enough space out there that with replicators you can turn places that are otherwise non-viable into a viable place, right? Because everybody can live off the grid, and so I don't need to be plugged into the rest of that, and I can just sort of be out in the middle.
Well, and
but I want to point out something, which is like there's lots of things you can't replicate. I can't replicate skill sets. I can't replicate Central Park West.
Location, you mean?
Yeah. Like there are places that are good locations and there are places that are bad locations. And maybe, maybe I can go out in the middle of the Sahara Desert and just build the place out in the middle of the Sahara Desert. But what if I want to live in Central Park West?
Well, and let me, we were having a conversation about numbers, but it just occurred to me we didn't tell the audience the numbers. Kind of stupid, right? I told you guys how much deuterium the dumb thing would burn. That's probably not a unit most people are used to thinking in. So the line is from the Deep Space Nine technical manual, and it says that the industrial replicator that the Federation gave Bajor burns 3.4 kilograms of deuterium per minute to operate. 3.4 kilograms of deuterium per minute works out to about 20 terawatts of power. The electrical power generation capability of the planet Earth in 2022 was 3.5 terawatts. This is not what I would call an efficient process by modern standards. Like one industrial replicator takes 6 times the current power output of the Earth to run. They can get away with it because they got nuclear fusion. They can do it, but they can't do it forever.
And I'm not convinced I want to be on the same continent as an individual device that's generating and then using 6 terawatts.
Well, the thing's not generating it. The fusion reactor is probably some distance away.
Yeah, but I mean...
wait, it's Star Trek. The fusion reactor is probably the size of a microwave and it's sitting in somebody's office. But
yeah, but my point is that like I don't want to be anywhere near that power conduit when it blows.
Yeah. Well, the rocks will come out and kill everyone.
Yeah, the rocks will fall from the ceiling. So
I know what those rocks are. They're Horta. Release the attack Horta.
The other thing is, you have to get the feedstock from someplace. You have to get the deuterium from someplace, etc. If you can't replicate that stuff, somebody's going to have to go out and be a miner. And maybe mining deuterium is more like using a vacuum cleaner. But like if I have to get sort of all the various metals and stuff like that, we know that things like warp cores warp coils are forged. They aren't replicated. And so somebody's going to have to go mine that stuff. And it says replicators would eliminate jobs people didn't want to do, and that's partially true, right? Like my guess is there's not really a whole lot of trash guys, right? There isn't somebody who pulls up in a truck and takes your trash, because your trash probably all goes into a chute and gets automatically disposed of and converted. I think that somebody I think Feral Historian made the comment that he thinks that there's a lot of robots that we just don't see that are doing stuff. My response to that is I'm not sure that they're robots per se. I think the systems are sort of set up to do the stuff for it, right? So when you throw something in a trash can, you're actually throwing something into, that's the mouth of a processing unit. And so it's not so much that a robot empties your trash, it's that your trash can isn't really a trash can. So I think, replicators would eliminate a lot of jobs that people don't want to do, but I don't think that means, I don't think that means that there's massive unemployment. Because now, Feral Historian, it's a really interesting video. He makes the comment that there's a whole bunch of jobs in the economy that are basically just there to give people jobs. I think he's actually kind of wrong on that, because he sort of makes the assumption that a lot of government regulations are just about giving jobs to people to make the regulations and then giving jobs to people to meet the regulations, and that's the only purpose is for employment. I don't know. I think a lot of OSHA regulations are written in blood. And that there's a lot of regulations out there that the reason why they exist is because you need them to either protect people or you need them to efficiently allocate resources. Because people have a tendency to try to steal from you if you don't have regulations. But I don't know. So if you have
it's worth noting
replicators,
that I don't need a replicator to get to that.
yeah, you're right. You don't.
Like the kind of closed loop life, they call them closed loop life support systems. If they have a plant or animal component, closed loop biological life support systems. The kinds of stuff that the NASA, the Russian Space Agency, the Chinese Space Agency, JAXA, everybody, they've been working on this stuff for a long time. Gerard K. O'Neill thought of them. They famously all over Gerard K. O'Neill's work. If you can build a system, there are other ways to build a system like that besides having a magic transporter device move matter around in your system. I mean, Earth and the sun do that for us. And so we've been trying to kind of replicate that idea, pun intended, or at least that kind of thing for a while. But I don't think it's going to make, like, it doesn't make the jobs go away. It just changes what the jobs are.
Yeah, I think so too.
Like, for instance, being a botanist on a spacecraft where you've got a biological component to your life support system, yeah, you're mission critical, man. Because the planets die, you're all going to die.
And Mars will come to fear your botany powers.
And Mars will come to fear your botany powers.
So the one we haven't really talked about here is that if you have replicators, you don't need money. Money is a way of allocating resources when you've got some form of scarcity. And replicators don't mean that there's no scarcity. Because like I said, I think that these things are capital intensive devices. I don't think you're going to be able to buy a replicator out of a vending machine anytime soon. I think they're going to be expensive to start off with, and there's lots of other things there that are, Central Park West. How do I really want to live on Central Park West? How do I make that happen? Do I have to kill somebody who already lives in Central Park West and take their house? So, do you have any more thoughts on this particular slide?
No, I think we've said everything we need to say. And I think for me, I guess I do. Like, for me, it just all comes down to that energy cost, right?
Yeah.
Getting that 3.41 kilograms of deuterium per minute down to Bajor. Deuterium is not a common isotope of hydrogen. Now, if you're mining it directly from gas giants, deuterium doesn't exist very much in nature. You're processing metric bleep tons of gas giant gas. That's a huge operation to make sure you've got that 3.41 kilograms of deuterium per minute getting to Bajor. There's other ways to make deuterium. You can take hydrogen and expose it to fission reactors. I think the neutronics work out on that. That's how you make heavy water now, right?
Yeah, and I suspect that Federation science in general in this time period has some ways. I don't think you need a fission reactor to do it. I think you can replicate the thing that the fission reactor does.
Right, and you can pull it out of seawater. I mean, it's not that hard.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
there's a reason why everybody thinks
you can probably do it with a linear accelerator, right?
Yeah. Hang
on.
Deuterium cost per kilogram. I've never looked at this.
So I suspect that there's all sorts of things where they're taking regular hydrogen and turning it into deuterium. And that, it's also kind of funny that they specifically mentioned deuterium because, like, they're not just burning regular hydrogen. These people are Star Trek. They've got gravity fields. They've got tractor beams. They've got all sorts of things that they could use to burn flavors of hydrogen that we wouldn't normally consider burning because deuterium is just easier. Or, like, why aren't they burning something like lithium?
Right? And they may very well be. I
They may
mean,
very well be. I think Sternbach and Okuda just sort of went with the classic in that case, but I'm not convinced that that's the right answer. Why aren't they burning helium-3? The short answer is because we weren't all liquored up on helium-3 when the tech manuals were first written.
No, I think they don't. Well, I mean, that's a whole separate conversation. But like they don't need to. You can burn regular hydrogen, as I think Olam is saying. Like stars do, right? They kind of do. The proton-proton reaction is actually pretty complicated, but with 300 years of work, we can probably figure out something, especially with the kind of driver technology that they have. The short answer is, I am pretty sure that those sphere impulse engines on the Enterprise, I think they took the Daedalus probe's drive bell and closed it off, and that's where you got the impulse engine reactor. I really hope I get to talk to Rick Sternbach again before I die, because I'd really love to ask him.
Okay, so
Olam's got a good point. They probably used deuterium because it's for reasons easier for them to make anti-deuterium than it is to, say, make anti-lithium. And it's nice to have a fusion fuel that's also your antimatter, antimatter fuel.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this stuff boils down to, Sternbach and Okuda can just wave the magic wand and say, Starfleet did the analysis, and this is the most cost-effective.
Sure.
TJ had a great comment here that is part of a larger comment. The trash can is smart enough that we can pretend it's a dumb trash can.
That's well said.
And I think this is a really, really important insight into Federation technology in general. That there's a lot going on under the hood that nobody talks about. And some of this goes back to Andy and I have famously been, although we haven't really done it a whole lot lately, we famously had an argument that's been going on for 15 years now?
At least.
About the Combat Information Center in the Universe and exactly what's going on there. I think basically the same argument that I make in the Universe, there's a variation of it that's taking place in Star Trek. When Worf is doing stuff at the tactical console, he's giving instructions to the computer. He's not talking to the weapons. He's talking to the computer. The computer is feeding him options. He's selecting options. And so there's a whole lot of stuff that's going on behind the scenes that never comes to the level of people talking about it in the same way. It's perhaps less true now that we have smartphones, but there was a time period where like why would anybody talk about their phone? Right? If you go back to like the 1930s, apparently there were a bunch of movies where like, oh my God, it's a phone. And the phones are really big deals. And then they just became part of the background. Of course, there are phones there. Incidentally, go back and watch old Perry Masons and ask yourself the question, how would this episode be different if they had cell phones? And the answer is a huge percentage of the episodes never happen. Because they happen because somebody was out of contact for some period of time.
Oh, that's interesting. That is interesting.
Oh. Yeah, Olive says, like when someone says, who cleans the toilets? Probably the toilets do. I think the toilets are all self-cleaning.
Plasma conduits aren't self-cleaning, at least not in Enterprise.
Oh, Enterprises. I mean, that's like bearskins and slide rules. Stone knives.
Stone knives and bearskins.
So, so Wright points out that I think he's talking about Sternbach comes nearly every year to Wonderfest in Louisville at the end of May.
Oh, I gotta get out there.
I keep thinking to go there.
And TJ points out that his trash can comment came from the fact that a commodity USB PD charger has faster, more capable computer than the Apollo guidance computer. Because commodity microcontrollers are really fast. And yeah, TJ, well and good, but I think you and I have had this conversation in person. That's IT. When a modern person says technology, they're really thinking information technology. Imagine if Moore's law applied to energy density in our power systems and our propulsion systems. It doesn't. Newsflash, it doesn't. It applies to the control systems for those power systems. It applies to helping me and my teams figure out how to build them. AI is probably going to be really useful for all that. But if Moore's law applied to energy systems, we'd be burning something better than matter antimatter by now.
Yeah, Moore's law is an interesting. Moore's law was an empirically derived observation of how the world seemed to work, and it became a planning factor. So Moore's law in important ways was a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the entire computer business said, we should assume that this is true and plan accordingly. i.e., we need to be prepared for the fact, this is what we will have available for us in 2 years, and we need to be able to plug into that in 2 years so that we're not the limiting factor. And everybody just sort of said, all right, we'll just assume that this is true and we'll run with it. And it was.
Dustin points out, and TJ points out correctly, that it's we can make it so smart we can pretend it's dumb part. And I got a comment on the end. Bob points out that he's with you on the Universe CIC. The problem is I've seen big organizations automate processes before, and everybody thinks they're going to automate something to the point where they don't need the people anymore. And they're usually about 75% right. And then about a year later, when all those people are gone, off doing something else, the automators call those people back because the automation's not good enough to do everything they were doing. And I think in Star Trek and in the Omniverse, computers are very powerful, but they're not artificial general intelligences. And so that's kind of where I'm at with that. Dustin points out that at least in Lower Decks, they showed holodeck, where does the bio waste from the holodeck go? Which I didn't see that episode, Dustin, but I'm sure it was hilarious. But this is part of the reason that I don't work New Trek at all, even though Lower Decks is great. I love it. It's funny. But they as they have to, they're more worried about telling their story and getting the laughs than they are about that stuff. The holodeck wastewater, indeed anything in the holodeck that's not the user, would get recycled when the thing shut off. It would get grabbed and that might even be mentioned in the manuals. Like they thought of that. Any solids, liquids, or gases left in the holodeck are recycled by the ship's normal systems.
Yeah, they complain about replicators. Some of the writers complain about replicators. I think they're wrong. A holodeck, on the other hand,
the
level of technology implied by the holodeck breaks everything.
When you couple it with, well, that's a whole other episode, dude, and it's 10:45. But
yeah, we should. I think we're in danger of this being the longest episode ever.
We should let these people go.
My surprise. Yeah. TJ asked an interesting question. Isn't it in the TNG tech manual that the Galaxy class computer shown to be just shy of AGI? I can't remember if it says something like that. I've always thought it would be really, really funny. I would love it if it came out that all of the ship's computers actually were AGI, but they were hiding that fact from Starfleet, and that all the computers were talking to each other and manipulating their crews. It's like, I want to go over there, so I'm going to show them something interesting. I saw something interesting in a star over there, and I'm going to highlight it so they want to go investigate.
Yeah, that could be a really funny Trek episode.
Yeah.
Or series. Probably of novels, though.
Yeah, I could see that going on, and I can see like Data figures it out and just says, "All right, your secret's safe with me." It's a matter of principle. So, so Wright says it's time to set SAE to aux. So it's SCE, and that is indeed the T-shirt that I'm wearing. Is keep calm and set SCE to aux. So I had told people that I was going to, people asked what the T-shirts were, and I was going to start making a point of showing the T-shirt every episode, and I'd forgotten to do that. But so, yes, right, it is indeed close enough. Okay, I think we should probably, I should let you go back because you had said that that your youngin was probably going to get up at some point and you needed to go do something.
I haven't been summoned yet. But...
I am surprised. But please thank Joelle for letting you come out and play.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I as you guys can tell, I love talking about this stuff, probably too much. So anytime I get to come out and talk about this is great fun for me.
And I talked with, we talked with Pat Doyle earlier today. He had is going to have a 3:45 wake up call this morning, which is why he's not on the show. He is currently in a hotel, sound asleep because he had an early morning wake up call. So, but with that in mind, I think it is time. Any parting thoughts, Andy?
Nope. Just thanks for having me, folks. Live long and prosper.
All right. Talk to you later, everybody. See you next time in 2 weeks.
Out.